Hey everyone, today we are going to be discussing a wonderful film, and that is 1979's Alien, directed by Ridley Scott.
Towards you! Move! Get out of there!
Now, I've seen this movie dozens and dozens of times. It's one of the first films I was introduced to as a child, and it actually really piqued my interest into the craft of filmmaking, because originally I wanted to be a science fiction horror special effects artist, and films like this, and specifically this film, really contribute to that aspiration. But eventually I just wanted to make my own film, so I moved on to filmmaking itself. But this film has a special place in my heart. And obviously you have the sequel Aliens, which was also a big influence on me since I was little, considering Stan Winston was involved. In the original one, you have Geiger designed a lot of the film and a lot of the creatures, most of the set design when it came to the xenomorphs and when it came to the alien planet, specifically the derelict spacecraft. So you have Geiger, you have Ridley Scott, you have James Cameron, and you have Stan Winston, this tour de force of names that really contributed to some of the most iconic creatures and special effects that we grew up with in the 80s, 90s, and late 70s, and into the 2000s more or less. But CGI really took over after the fact and dominated. So in the 80s and 90s, with the evolution of CGI, you also had practical effects being a very big contributing factor to a lot of these films that required them. So it was a nice hybrid and a slow fade into the CGI dominant world. But like I said earlier, Alien and Aliens really contributed to that, because the designs of the creatures and the aliens and the ships are just beyond, and super realistic and super thought out and super detailed, especially considering Geiger's design. And that brings us back to the movie we're here to discuss, which is Alien. This movie has a small cast, headlined by Sigourney Weaver. Tom Skerritt comes across in the beginning as more or less the captain of the ship and the leader, but Sigourney kind of takes charge and weaves her way nicely throughout the film. You have Ian Holm, you have Veronica Cartwright, you have Yaphet Kotto, John Hurt, Harry Dean Stanton, all familiar names, all familiar faces from that era, in movies that we've seen dozens of times, movies that we've seen multiple of times. And there's something about this film, even more so than Aliens, not as much more so than the more recent ones, but there's something about this movie that comes off as super realistic. And this is what I'm always drawn to in this, as a rewatchability factor. Because I have said that I'm a seasonal movie watcher, but this is an example of a film that I could probably watch all year whenever I'm in the mood for it, and I'm often in the mood for this movie. And I think it is the realistic factor. It's the unknown factor. Later in Prometheus and Alien Covenant, films that I'm not going to touch on too much here, I rewatched them, and I think because they're interesting, but the story arc in those films I think was poorly executed. Some of the writing was terrible. The set design's cool, the ideas are interesting, but I think it dilutes the terror, which is an Alien, of the unknown and just the random factor of these creatures. And we're introduced to this huge mining ship in the beginning, and there's something so cool about this set design and the way that they built this, where it's very rugged. It seems like this ship has been in use for a long time. It's not flashy, it's not sterile, it's not clean. It's got, office spaces, it's got a lot of mechanics, it's dripping, it's humid, it's been lived in, it's been worked in. It's not luxurious at all. It's what you would think an industrial mining ship should look like. Even the computers are older, and they feel older. I mean, yes, it's 1979, so the technology they had to make this movie wasn't what we had now, but there's something to be said about like older computers, and it adds to the aesthetic of this film for sure. Especially the ship and the way the characters interact as a working crew.
Clay.
Yeah. Oh, I feel dead. Anybody ever tell you look dead, man?
So in this film, you have a mining crew that's traveling from deep space. They awaken on their journey home to Earth a little early, and there is a beacon that Mother, who is the AI of the ship, alerts them to from a nearby planet. And by law, they are required to investigate these things. So the small group of characters in their own little drama, work drama, kind of decide they have to go do it. And what's interesting is that their dialogue, the way they interact is super authentic. You know, they talk over each other. It doesn't feel too prominent of points being made. It's just banter, workplace banter. Because again, this is a blue collar group of miners, not, you know, space explorers on a mission or, you know, a rescue mission. It's just, you know, in the future, a working crew that happens to work in deep space is on their way home, and this horrible event happens to them.
Which say got any business on there?
So eventually, the crew goes down to this planet. Ripley, Sigourney Weaver, stays behind. She's with Ash, who we don't know is an android yet, which that turns out to be a really cool twist, and it's brilliantly played by Ian Holm as the original android in this franchise.
Bring back life form.
Lambert, played by Veronica Cartwright, John Hurt, and Tom Skerritt, all head off to the planet to investigate the beacon. They come across this really creepy derelict spacecraft. Inside, they find this huge alien astronaut type thing who is often referred to as the space jockey, sitting there in looks like a captain's chair or something of that sort. And they discover that there's something that has burst out of its chest, and it's fossilized, so it must have been there for hundreds, maybe thousands of years, they assume. Eventually they keep exploring, and Geiger's design really stands out here. You know, you have the layout of the ship, the mechanics of the ship, the architecture of the ship is just otherworldly. You know it's not human as soon as you see this, you know, and that's another interesting thing on this planet. You know, aside from the terror of this movie, which is the alien and what these people go through, you also have this somewhat of an underlying adventure happening. You know, it's cool. You know, they go to this planet. What's mysterious? What's on it? You know, it's stormy. It's windy. It seems very rocky. What's the backstory of this spaceship? What's going on here? So there is a mystery also on top of this. And I think that contributes to the science fiction adventure side of this film. But eventually they go down. John Hurt comes across the eggs. Really cool set design. You have the mist layer on top. You have the humidity, the sweatiness, the organic aspect of these eggs. And it's just a really gritty design. It's not overly sterile. It's not overly produced. It's not overly designed. It's just, it feels like it belongs where it is, as mysterious as the circumstances are.
There's a layer of mist just covering the eggs that reacts when broken.
So eventually John Hurt gets overzealous. He goes up to this egg, it opens up, and you got to imagine, you know, these people are on the verge of a discovery, so they're enthralled by the mystery of this. They're not thinking that clearly when it comes to, you know, there could be a possible threat here. Where Sigourney Weaver, Ripley, does have her mindset, and she has her together. And she has her whereabout together when it comes to cautiousness. So eventually John Hurt gets too close, egg pops out, boom, the terrifying, nightmarish face hugger grapples him down to the ground. And now we are back later on with Tom Skerritt, Lambert, Tom Skerritt, Dallas, I should say, that's his character, Dallas and Lambert bringing out this injured astronaut, John Hurt, who's got something on his face down to the ship. And Ripley is apprehensive of letting them on because there are quarantine protocols. I mean, technically she's right. There could be a pathogen, there's something that could destroy them completely or something that they could bring back to Earth.
Open the hatch.
Wait a minute. If we let it in, the ship could be infected. You know the quarantine procedure.
24 hours for decontamination.
But they are panicked and they're not really thinking clearly, so eventually Ash overrides Ripley because he has ulterior motives, brings John Hurt and the rest of the crew back on the board. There's some dynamics, there's some drama playing out between Ripley and the captain. So eventually, John Hurt's put in the infirmary. We know what happens. There's some interesting things with the acid blood. They're trying to remove the face hugger, which is an incredible design by Geiger. I mean, the knuckles, the hands, it's something out of a nightmare, and it's truly effective. So eventually they, after some tests, and Ash also is really heavily involved in this thing, and he seems to be thinking about it and not letting everybody in on what he's learning. Because as we learn later, there's orders from company that to get this alien home for research, and the crew is expandable. But we'll get there. So eventually the face hugger removes itself, it gets lost. John Hurt, wakes up. They're back to eating breakfast, some more banter, very authentic. And eventually the chest burster scene happens, which was iconic, which shocked audiences. And speaking of audiences, the marketing of this film was also brilliant. I wasn't alive when this came out in theaters, but I was born in 1985, so I would rent this from Blockbuster at the time. And I remember specifically the tagline, "In space, no one can hear you scream." In space, no one can hear you scream, which is just brilliant. You see the egg, that's all you need, and it brings audiences out of intrigue to theaters, at least it used to. Now they just show you everything. But eventually the chest bursting scene happens, everyone's completely freaked out. This alien comes out and just runs off because Ash holds off Parker from hitting it or killing it and whatnot. So now this thing's loose on the ship.
You choking?
What's wrong?
What's wrong?
No, no,
Don't touch it! Don't touch it!
Ash builds some tracking thing, so they decide to go out and look. And you have Brett, Harry Dean Stanton, Parker's mechanic, ship-fixing buddy, goes off and searches for the cat Jonesy. He's in this back room, and it's very humid, very Blade Runner-like, the way you have the height and the light and the fog and the dripping water, and he takes a break and wipes his head, and the filmmaking of this is brilliant. And eventually he comes across the cat, and eventually he finds the alien skin, foreboding that now it's bigger. So he takes a break, drops some water his head, and the alien drops down behind him and reveals himself to him, and he's killed in a very quick but disturbing sequence. This is where Dallas dies in the great terrifying sequence in the hatch tunnels. More cool design with the way the hatches close, like eye pupils, and the darkness of it, and like the tension that they built up with the tracking device and the beeping and everything. It's just masterclass in filmmaking and horror. So eventually Dallas is killed and disappeared. Now Ripley's getting more terrified. Obviously something's going on. This isn't right. Why is Ash acting strange? So Ripley, now that Dallas is gone, is acting commander. So she basically taps into Mother and finds out the orders that were left for this creature, and it was by all means necessary. The crew is expendable, but get this creature home. So now she's freaked out, and eventually Ash starts glitching because we learn he's an android at this point, which must have been an amazing twist in theaters at the time, and for people who had just seen this movie without any knowledge. But this is where Ash attacks her, does the strange magazine thing, and overpowers her with his strength of now that we know he's a robot. And I just remember the sequence as a kid when he's like trying to shove the magazine down her throat, or like choke her with it, or suffocate her with it. It was just very odd, but also realistic and interesting and authentic in the grounding that this film laid forth. So Parker comes in, knocks his head off. He's glitching, wigging out as this android. They're all freaked out. They had no idea. He's bleeding out all this white fluid. Really, really interesting sequence and beautifully done by Ian Holm, and scary in its own right, and another threat that presented itself outside of the alien.
It's a robot.
So now Ripley, Parker, and Lambert are the only ones who remain. They rewire Ash's brain or something to turn him on for a few moments to just get any more information out of him. He kind of adds to the terror by saying basically you can't kill it, blah, 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 blah. So Parker blowtorches him to death in another cool set piece, miniature set piece, which was his head melting underneath of it. And again, the filmmaking in this movie's on another level, and the cinematography is fantastic, but the shots, everything was just classic Ridley Scott, but also classic film, and just the graininess to it. It's just, and the shots are held longer. There's just something in this film that is beyond anything else in the franchise. I guess Alien would be a close second, but even that movie's just more action heavy, and it's just typical James Cameron in its own right. This movie's like a painting.
Its structural perfection is matched only by its hostility.
So now Lambert, Ripley, and Parker are trying to figure out what to do. I guess they decide to take the pod and get out of there, but there's not enough space, so they're still debating what to happen. So they decide to just basically figure it out, self-destruct the ship. Parker Parker, who was at odds with Ripley in the beginning in a more facetious way, since he was a union, like, I guess, mechanical guy, him and Brett. And again, that was a really interesting factor too. You just adds more to the realism that this is just a company thing and these are ordinary people. But now, you know, circumstances are extraordinary. So Parker, Ripley, they come together, and he shows, you know, almost like a heroic ending when Lambert, who most people thought was annoying, Lambert, but I think it fits her character. Again, she's just a worker in deep space, and this circumstance is absolutely frightening. So I would be a little freaked out too. So it fits her character, and Veronica Cartwright's fantastic at it. She basically is getting some tanks together, and the alien confronts her and kills her, or attempts to kill her, and Parker kind of jumps in to save her. And it's a little bit of a heroic moment for her as he screams, you know, run or get out of here. But eventually he's killed with the secondary mouth of this alien. And then Lambert is attacked. And it's a really scary scene because we cut away from it, and you just hear her scream over the intercom that Ripley hears, and it's really spine-chilling. Yeah, I can't imagine what happened to her. And I saw someone make a comment one point on a message board saying how when in the lore, and I'm not sure Ripley Scott thought this at the time, I may be wrong, but if an alien gestates in someone before it chest bursts, it adopts characteristics of them. So when the alien attacks Lambert, earlier in the film, Kane, who was the host for the alien, kind of was hitting on her or whatever, had an attraction for her. So maybe the alien kind of played with her a little bit. And there is kind of some seductive shots there a little bit. So I don't know, just an interesting thing to think about. But eventually she's killed. Her scream is terrifying. Ripley's left alone, and she has her cat. So her plan is basically to self-destruct the ship and take the escape pod home and put herself in cryogenic sleep. So now here we are. We have Ripley, you know, legendary character, alone and ready to take on the task in front of her, and a true female heroine, one that wasn't written into this film because you needed one that fit the character. And Sigourney Weaver is so fantastic and believable as this character, and she really steps it up. And what's so authentic is, like, you know, she's not saving the day the whole movie. She's just a higher up official on the captaincy of this ship, and she basically goes through her fear, because there are moments where she's terrified. I mean, right here at the end when she's alone, could you imagine running around this mechanical ship as it's about to self-destruct, and you have a time limit while this horrific, violent, nightmarish creature is trying to stalk you or find you or eventually run into you and kill you? So she really captures the fear of that and overcoming it, and it's brilliant, and it fits her character awesomely. And she also has her cat, which she's taking care of, so you just have these added elements to this character, you know, and she's super independent, and from the beginning of the film, you knew that she wasn't a pushover, but she is scared, so there's vulnerability there. She isn't a Mary Sue that could just do anything to defeat the alien. So she gets on the escape pod, and also I should say that the set design here, the steam, the counting down of the destruction, the frantic aspect of it, the handheld used when needed, all works. And it's just, it really is a masterclass in tension building, and just I don't know, it stands the test of time for me. -1 minute. So basically she gets on the escape pod, she has her cat, she's ready to do everything she's ready to do.
4, 3, 2, 1.
Well, the ship has been destroyed. She thought she was scot-free, and here she is discovering the alien who's embedded itself almost like a lizard with camouflage into the pipes on the side of the ship. So she awakens it, she freaks out, she runs and she hides, and she watches this thing kind of move around, and she comes up with a desperate plan to steam it out and to knock it out the airlock, and she does, and she blows it to pieces with the afterburners of the engine. And here here we have Ripley surviving her nightmarish experience with her cat on her way to the next installments of the franchise. But as a standalone film, it's terrifying, it's beautiful, it's well written, it's well directed, it's well acted, and there's not a moment in this film that takes me out of it because everything contributes to the story, and it's just fits together as a painting of horror and science fiction, and there will never be anything like it again. That's how original it was, and we need more original films so they can become classics like this one. And real quick, I'll just touch on Aliens. I loved it, more action heavy. I actually liked it more as a child than I did this one, but I grew up and kind of more appreciated Alien more in its own right because it is just another level. Aliens is amazing, don't get me wrong, fantastic. Ripley, badass, Bishop, all the Marines, everything's so cool about that movie, but it does stand aside from this one for me now.
Ripley, what the hell are you doing?
The rest of them I could do with or without. Alien 3, obviously David Fincher had his issues with the studio and the production. I may revisit that again at some point. Alien Resurrection, blah. Predator vs. Alien, blah, blah. I mean, Predator, we'll get to that this summer, but as far as the Alien franchises go, Prometheus and Covenant I can completely do without. I think David creating the aliens ruins and undermines the horrifying aspect of the creature in the first one. But they are still interesting, so I will rewatch those from time to time. But I'm able to enjoy Alien without attaching them to it. But one thing that did bother me about Prometheus was the set design. It seemed way more futuristic than Alien. And I get it, there's more technology when it comes to filmmaking, but if the stories are kind of similar, if Prometheus is supposed to take place before Alien, why does the technology look 1,000 times better? So it does have its issues in that regard and just in regard overall, but we'll touch that movie at some point. So if you haven't seen Alien, go check it out. It's Ridley Scott at his best. When he's on, and I give that man respect because he doesn't stop. Some of his movies are not that good at all, but it's Ridley Scott, so man, throw the man some props. And you got the original badass Ripley, a feminist movie that's not feminist. It's just a movie with a female character that's awesome and she's the hero. And that's what we need more of, take it out. Just give me a good story with a good cast and a good production and, I'm down.